Hey everybody, I'm gonna try this, which is something new for now, and let's see what happens. So I am in my car about to head home, and I actually do this quite a lot when I am on my way to and from work. I will do a lot of meetings, especially like my 10 a.m. meeting. I will do that meeting a lot of times from my car. So we're gonna try this. So I'm gonna warn everybody kind of right away. You are not going to see me respond to any comments that people might make in the chat because I want to be sure that I am being safe while I'm driving. So I won't be able to really respond if people are sending me things until maybe later on. So if anybody has questions, I might answer them in the comments later, or if I get to a place where I am parked again, I might be able to check things out and try to do that there. So for those who are hopping on here for the very first time, I'm Kristen DiBiase, and this is 100 Pounds Down, where we preach the gospel of GLP-1, and the word is good. So if you are a person who is thinking about trying anti-obesity medications like Mounjaro, Wegovy, Ozempic, or Zepbound, if you're already on your journey, or you're getting toward the end of that journey and you're heading toward that maintenance phase and wondering what comes next, this is the channel for you. I previously struggled with obesity for almost my entire life, and I finally was able to find an answer that worked for me, and I was able to lose over 41% of my body weight by taking tirzepatide, also known as Mounjaro or Zepbound. So this is Kristen in the car, as one of my small groups of very close friends likes to call it. I've done this a ton with people when we are usually talking about something, or I will do this when I am doing certain meetings, because for those who are not aware, I live in the Pacific Northwest. I live in the Seattle area, and the traffic is crazy here. So I do a lot of work at my home office and at my office at work, so I can kind of navigate and do things around the traffic here, just for my own sanity and mental health, to be really honest. I think if I had to come in and work every day where I had to come in during the regular rush hour, I could be very homicidal. It could be a bad kind of situation. I kid, but it is pretty crazy out here, to be really honest, in terms of how traffic can get. Our rush hour in the Seattle area is more than an hour, number one. It can be up to 2.5 hours during those really peak times. And so I try very hard to not be on the road. I usually am working from home on Fridays, honestly. And so on occasion, I do have to do something a little bit different if something demands that with the schedule that the school has. So my weekly schedule kind of moves all over the place depending on what's happening on the calendar for what I'm doing for my job. Alrighty, so today I wanted to talk to you all just really quickly about news that has come out that I've seen on what's happening with folks who do Plan C in terms of some of the drug makers. So in my most recent update, we talked a little bit about how the FDA had talked about the shortage being over because that's what Eli Lilly reported to them. And the compounding association, the folks who represent a lot of compounders or folks who are doing Plan C, they sued the FDA, and so the FDA kind of put a pause and are currently reevaluating whether or not Lilly truly is out of a shortage. So today I want to talk to you about some more news that involves the FDA, but this time it is actually with Novo Nordisk, who are the makers of Wegovy and Ozempic. So for folks who are following this idea of compounders and folks who are using Plan C as a more affordable option to get access to this life-changing medication, there are certain ways and restrictions that have to be kind of very carefully followed in order for folks to legally be on good footing to be allowed to do manufacturing using this Plan C option. And within the way that the FDA oversees this entire process, there is two sections of the Code of Federal Regulations, or the CFR, that really deal with human drugs. So drugs that are on humans, like not animal or anything like that. So specifically for drugs that are made for use in humans, there are rules around doing Plan C, and there's kind of two major subsections of that rule that discuss the two ways that that can happen. So in addition to that rule that talks about those two ways that that can happen, there is also additional rules that the FDA puts in place around whether or not folks can even do the manufacturing of certain kinds of medications under these processes. And so they have a list which is called the DDC list. The DDC list is a list that the FDA maintains that talks about particular types of drugs that you are not allowed to manufacture through a Plan C option. Just straight up, you can't make these kinds of drugs if you are trying to do a Plan C as a manufacturer because of the DDC. And the DDC stands for demonstrable or demonstrably difficult to compound. So the DDC list is stuff that essentially is, the FDA says, this is too hard and too complicated for people to make if they're not like the very specific drug manufacturer of the pharmaceutical company that came up with the concept of how this particular drug is manufactured. And so they won't let any organization outside of those particular manufacturers even try to make that particular drug. This rule actually was heavily discussed by the FDA, and it has been since 2017. They tried to put these rules in place back in 2017, and there was a lot of discussion and debate around it, and there was kerfuffle when it came to a lot of the organizations that do Plan C, but really pushing back on this. So what ended up happening is that on hold for quite a long time. So now, only just this year, earlier in this spring, did the FDA actually start kind of moving toward putting together this DDC list again. And so some of the things that they are looking at when they are making the decisions on whether or not something should go on this DDC list, they've got about 6 kind of different areas where they talk about certain things that they're going to look at and balance to decide whether or not a type of drug or medication should go on this list. Among those is, the difficulty of the manufacturing process that itself is what creates the medication. There's also the difficulty in sourcing the materials that go into medication itself. That is one of the things that they are looking at. And they have a few others, around safety and things of that nature. But one thing that is conspicuously absent, it absolutely is not and is never considered within those criteria, is how much it costs to make the medication. So simply the fact that a drug that is, patented and is being made by a pharmaceutical company is a high price, that is never part of the calculus. That's not part of the decision. And so within that listing, there were originally different types of medications that the FDA was considering putting on this list. Now, before I go into that, I will give a really, really brief explanation of how the rulemaking process works. For folks who are more recent subscribers or viewers of my channel, my background is in law. I do have a law degree. I work in a law school. I just have a personal interest and affinity for the science around health and medication and wellness and all of those things. And I also have a lot of folks in my family who work in the medical field. My husband works in the medical field. I have a lot of relatives who are in nursing. I have an aunt who's a biochemist. And so I kind of come by this honestly kind of being steeped in it. And I'm also a person who has chronic illness, and I am a person who has disabilities where I've spent a lot of time working in areas where there's a bit of an intersection on these things. So sometimes I like to go into kind of the legal processes that underpin some of these things to give people a little bit of an explanation of what's going on and what honestly, one of the things that is kind of how the country actually runs. When we're kids, we've all seen, the whole thing of like I am a bill and how a bill becomes a law on Schoolhouse Rock. And we all know about, the three branches of government: executive and legislative and judicial. And in that, very simplified story, the legislative branch are the branch that make rules, and executive, they carry it out. And the judicial, they're the ones they're the referees when there's disagreements on how the law works. In reality, it's a lot more complicated than that. And there's an entire branch of lawmaking that is called rulemaking. And rulemaking is a function not of the legislative branch, but it's actually part of the executive branch. And so within the executive branch, that is where you get kind of all of those regulatory agencies that are in charge of taking bigger, broader laws that are made by the legislative branch, and then putting their expertise and knowledge about that very specific subject matter to work so they can make more specific types of rules and regulations that give the big law that the legislators have made the teeth that it needs to be enforceable. So if you think about it, the folks who make a lot of the laws in Congress, they're not doctors. A lot of them are not lawyers either. And they make a lot of laws around things that impact you and I and the regular citizenry every day. But you always want people who actually have an understanding in the subject matter that a big law is about to be the ones that are really working on the nitty-gritty details of how that law is actually going to be enforced and carried out, because they're the ones who are going to be able to have a better idea of maybe unintended circumstances that might happen from that. So consequences that people were not thinking about that might pop up, but somebody who works in that field would absolutely know to be watching for or be trying to solve for before a rule really starts getting enforced and people are starting to act under that rule. So the Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA, are the folks who are the watchdog over medications that people are taking, and that operates in the executive branch. So within the executive branch, any regulatory agency, which is what the FDA is, when they need to make rules about certain things, they will go through a process called rulemaking. The rulemaking process, it does have kind of statutory guidance on how it's supposed to go. There's a certain number of days that it has to be kind of out there and notice has to be given so the people can report on how they feel about it. So they will have a notice and comment period. So during the notice and comment period, the regulatory agency, and in this case the FDA, will put that information. This is what the rule is. This is what we're looking to do. Here's what we are thinking about putting in as rule, and this is what that rule is going to look like. Now, you get a certain number of days. Often it's 30 days. And in that 30 days, members of the general public are allowed to weigh in on this proposed set of rules or changes to the code of federal regulations and give their opinions on things. And so there will be just, you and I could just go on there and put our name down and give our opinion about something and submit that comment to the regulatory agency. So earlier this year, the FDA put out a notice that they were going to be making changes to this section of the law about folks who do this Plan C manufacturing, and they were going to be making changes to provide this list of the DDCs. So types of medications that it is demonstrably been shown that it is too difficult for those to be compounded. So this type of medication should not be allowed and will not be allowed to be a Plan C option. And so within that, they put this out in earlier this year in April. They talked about this and they put out this information for notice and comment. Typically, depending on how things run with rulemaking, after the notice and comment period is over, depending on what feedback they might have received, sometimes they might make some changes, but then they will let people know what those changes are. Sometimes they will just see, okay, this is what people said. They may or may not make any changes at all. But if there are not any changes, they will go ahead and they will publish the rule with the changes that they have made to the Code of Federal Regulations. And generally speaking, there's a time period that is a bit of a grace period until that rule goes into effect. So for this particular rule, it's a 30-day period. So in June, folks were, giving their opinions on this, and I read through and looked at some of the opinions that people were giving. Some people just from the general public were giving their opinions on things. There were opinions in there from a lot of folks, including some folks who are just pharmacists, some folks who are more formally giving a statement on behalf of like the Compounders Association, and of course the drug manufacturers themselves, Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk, also weighed in and provided formal comment from their organizations on these proposed sets of rules. So the DDC has gone into effect. Now, after kind of giving you that explanation of how rulemaking works, I'll go now back into the original idea that they were talking about. So the original idea that they were talking about had 6 different categories of medication that they had decided they wanted to put on this kind of first version of the DDC list. 3 of those, it looked like were going into different types of inhaled versions or inhalant style medications. So that really kind of has nothing to do with the medication that we're concerned with, which is the GLP-1 and other incretin mimetic type medications. When they finally looked at the actual, document of what was going to be on there, those 3 were not included on that list. And so there were really only 3 main types of medications that made it onto this initial round of the DDC list. And so there's 3 different types. It is not specific medications. Each of these 3 things are categories of types of medications. And by saying categories of types, I'll explain this in a moment. It's actually not, okay. Let me explain it like this way. So you know how we've been talking about, my whole channel, everything we talk about for the most part is about GLP-1 medications, or as we formally know them, their type is called incretin mimetics, okay? For folks who are taking these kind of medications, who take incretin mimetics, another medication that a lot of you may be familiar with is metformin, right? Well, the type of medication that metformin is called a biguanide, Biguanide, or biguanide. That is a type of medication, the same way that an incretin mimetic is a type of medication. So it's not that type. When I talk about a type of medication, it's not a specific class of medication that they have put on this list. So instead, when I talk about a type of medication here, they've actually really focused in on the manufacturing process to make these various medications, or the delivery method of the medication itself, to be what got these things on the list. Okay, so the first category that they have on this DDC list is medications that have essentially kind of a bi-layer delivery system. And this is me using more of a layman's explanation, a layman's term, to give people an easier understanding of what this means. The example that I will use for you all is a medication called Concerta. So, I don't know if I've mentioned it before. I think I have. It's not a secret, however. So I have ADHD. And the type of medication that I take for ADHD is methylphenidate, which that's the generic name of the compound. Again, compound with a lowercase c here. The drug that I take, the generic name for that drug is methylphenidate, in the same way that the generic for Mounjaro or Zepbound is tirzepatide, okay? There are lots of different versions of, the medication that are branded for people that take methylphenidate. The probably most common one, or most popular name that folks would recognize for methylphenidate is Ritalin, okay? So if I were to buy the brand name version of methylphenidate, my doctor would give me a prescription to buy Ritalin. There is another brand name version of methylphenidate called Concerta. Concerta is the same medication, but the way that it's delivered is different. And that's what makes it different and patented in a different way than just the straight regular chemical formulation of methylphenidate. And so the way that they have patented kind of the delivery for that particular medication in particular is that they have this kind of double layer distribution method. So you've got like your main amount of the medication. The bulk of the medication is in a tablet or a compacted powder version in the center of the pill. Then in addition, on the outside of that pill, they then have kind of a special digestible version, and I'm going to call it plastic, but it's not plastic. But it's essentially, for me, kind of simplifying this, I'm going to call it an edible plastic, okay? There's this edible plastic that makes a capsule on the outside of the tablet, and in between the tablet and the outside capsule is more of the medication that is in a looser form. And this edible plastic that is the outside capsule has hundreds of microscopic sized teeny tiny holes that are just dotted in the capsule. So to the naked eye, it looks like a solid capsule, but it really has like a ton of little tiny holes in it. So when you take that medication, there's a fast, kind of quicker release of the outside layer of the medication. So it's designed to hit and start working right away. But then the rest of it, that tablet, is on the inside. And that enables the tablet to be able to get a little bit further through your digestive system before it starts to dissolve. So it gives a longer lasting, more longer action of this medication. So there are people who, I have known this for years because one of the things that I was doing within my work in academia is I had a consulting firm where I was doing coaching for students in law who have ADHD. It's a well-known thing among folks in the ADHD community that if you are taking Concerta, you really don't want to get the generic version of Concerta because it does not work as well as the brand name version of Concerta. Folks in the ADHD community have known this for a really, really long time. And that is because when folks are making this, generic version, they're doing this manufacturing of the Concerta version of this medication. They're not doing a great job at that outside capsule piece and then the inside tablet piece. It's not good. It is not up to the same manufacturing kind of standards, this level of excellence that the original brand manufacturer at the pharmaceutical company is doing. And so everybody who takes Concerta knows they're just kind of stuck. If you are put on Concerta and Concerta works for you, you really have to just get the brand name version because the generic version or a Plan C version of Concerta just does not work very well. It's not releasing the same way as the brand version is intending for it to release. So that is the first type of medication that is now on this DDC list. And that medication is a perfect example of a medication that falls in that class. This kind of double layered thing where there's that core in the center with meds, and then there's this special edible plastic kind of on the outside with all the billions of tiny little holes. That's the first type of medication that is on this do not compound DDC list. The second kind of medication that is on this list is a kind of medication called a liposome medication. A liposome liposome medication is kind of honestly similar to what I just explained to you about that first kind of medication. So a liposome, very specifically, is a type of medication that is soluble in fat. Because you see the word lipo, anytime you see the word lipo, that means fat. So a liposome is a medication that is going to be soluble within fat. Medications that are soluble within fat are generally often not also soluble in water. The word soluble means basically dissolvable. Can it dissolve in water? Can it dissolve in fat? Medications, if you recall, if you are anybody who's watched my boot camp video, when we talked about proteins in that section, and I talked about how proteins are kind of amazing because they really can do a ton of stuff. Remember how I mentioned in my talk about proteins, about how fat cannot mix with water, and so you actually, in the body, your body tells proteins to go and basically shepherd the fat so it can move around in your bloodstream, because your bloodstream is actually mostly water, or things that are in your bloodstream, but the liquid that all of that is dissolved in, or all of that is made up of, is at its base water, which is the majority of all of our bodies actually. So medication that is dissolvable in fat, or which is designed to be absorbed through the fat in our bodies, is not able to be transported or absorbed in water. So how do we get medications that need to get to places that do work on fat but have to travel through water to get there? You make a liposome medication. So a liposome medication works almost in the same way as the first category of medication that I talked about. But it's like this, on a microscopic scale, super tiny. We're talking nanoparticle sized here, okay? Smaller than the head of a pin. Essentially, a liposome medication has teeny tiny micro capsules, and the liquid fat, or the liquid that is soluble, dissolvable, absorbable in fat, is going to be inside teeny tiny micro beads inside of another chamber that is water based. So think about like the size of a water molecule. You're going smaller than the size of a drop of water to get these teeny tiny micro capsules of lipid or fat soluble. So it is basically using the water to float these teeny tiny bits of lipid inside a pill. And that's what kind of gets the ability for these teeny tiny pieces to get where they need to go without being degraded. They're essentially being so small that they pass through, and this is me again kind of talking in layman's term, the holes in between water molecules as the water's there. It is very complicated, complex science on how a liposomal drug is made. It is far too complex for compounding to be done. So that is why that is the second type of medication that is on the DDC list, because the manufacturing is just too complex, too intricate. They don't want anybody trying to go plan C to manufacture those kinds of medications. The third type of medication that's currently on this list is any medication that is created through a process called hot melt extrusion. Now, I'm definitely not going to really get into the nitty gritty and nuts and bolts of hot melt extrusion, but for a super simplified version of what that means, hot melt extrusion is almost a thing where it's like the materials, the lowercase c compound that you are trying to do a chemical experiment on in order to be able to pull out what you need, the essential part of the medication, it has to be heated up, and it has to get to a certain temperature that's so high that it causes a chemical change in the actual substance of the material itself. And then after this chemical change happens, they then basically extrude, or like, it's kind of like pushing, what's another way? You know how they talk about how the sausage is made? If anybody's ever seen somebody like actually make sausage, there's a machine called an extruder. And it pushes all the stuff kind of through this machine, so it kind of turns into this very long rope of meat that ends up becoming the filling that goes inside a tasty sausage. You don't want to see it happen. You just want to eat the result at the end. But in our example here, pretend like instead of meat, it is literally one of the chemical compounds that has been created because of this very, very high temperature chemical change that has been kind of done. And it's the only way that you can get this compound, lowercase c compound, to even be created is at this super high temperature. And then you're going to push it through, and only that compound, lowercase c, is now there. You've kind of used this super high temperature to melt it down and pull out only the part that you need. That is also a very delicate and specified process that makes that happen. And so that is the third kind of medication that folks are not allowed to try to do a plan C option on. So currently, those are the only three kinds of medications that are on this DDC list. Now that I've given you that whole explanation in the background of what this list is, how it came to be, and what kinds of medications are on it, here's the actual news update. Recently, Novo Nordisk actually filed documents with the FDA, and they have asked the FDA, and they have provided documentation to support the arguments that they are making. They would like the FDA to consider putting semaglutide on their DDC list. Now, I mentioned earlier, again, kind of there's those 6 different kind of categories of things that people should be thinking about when determining whether or not something should go on that DDC list. And that is what Novo has tried to kind of put together. When I get home, which I'm getting close there, but when I get home, I will toss up and, I will clean all this up, toss this info, back out, put a thumbnail on everything, and put some more information in the description. But I will give you all links to the DDC list. I'll give you links to the filing that Novo submitted to the FDA, all of that good stuff, so you can see for yourselves what they are arguing. But Novo is essentially trying to make the argument that semaglutide should be on this DDC list. Here's my personal opinion, and I can't say that I'm right and that Novo is wrong. Based on what I've just explained to you about the 3 current things that are actually the types of medications that have been added to that DDC list, number 1. The 3 things that they had been thinking about putting on that list, which largely to me seems like it's all, aerosolized or inhaler-based kind of versions of medications, and those 3 did not make it onto the list. My personal opinion is that Novo will try this, but that they will not succeed. I've looked at some of the arguments that they have made, and a lot of the arguments that they are making is that it's too dangerous, and that essentially the ingredients that are necessary to make semaglutide, if it's not done correctly, it can cause something to happen where it can tell a person's body, actually, no, like, not only will semaglutide not help you, but you could get a permanent allergy to semaglutide and never be able to use semaglutide or other GLP-1 medications ever again. Here's the thing with that argument. There are lots of things that are not made for everyone. In any type of medication, as we've talked about, like in my Ozempic video, there are some people where genetically the way, I mean, because we're human beings, right? We're all different folks. We all have different ways of how our genetics are expressed. There are some people who will have outside of the norm reactions to certain kinds of medications. Like, I'm a super responder to GLP-1 medication. There are other people who are the opposite of me. They are sub-responders. There are some people who are gaining weight on this medication based on something internally about how their body responds to this medication. But that is the case across all medications. Because science it's getting there, it's getting better and better. And that's why, I mean, even like this kind of medication that we're on now even exists, right? Is as time passes and science gets deeper and deeper, and we are able to unlock things that have previously been secret about our bodies, it will be easier and easier to get to the next generation of medications, which is bespoke custom medication that is just specifically for one person only, just you. We're not quite there yet, right? But allergies to medications, or the unintended, like, kind of opposite effect, that happens on all medications. It's just that most people don't have those reactions. But anything you can think of, there is somebody who has the opposite reaction or has a very negative response. Even if the medication does work for them as it's intended to, it has some other side effect, even Tylenol, right? And so the fact that that is one of the things that they're arguing, I don't know if that is really a sufficient argument, but that's just one of the arguments that they are making. Another argument that is made kind of goes into the fact that there are various orgs that are, doing this Plan C manufacturing option they're not clean and safe and good facilities. And that's the case, just generally. There are companies that do not follow best practices, let alone regulation guidelines, and their products often are not safe. But people have been doing that and getting things from those places for forever. And when something occurs and it's tied to one of those places, they get shut down or they get censored. The FDA does send people in to look at those different places. And so it's not this idea of there are people that don't keep their facilities clean and that's dangerous for people. I mean, that could happen at any place, including pharmaceutical companies that manufacture. But those companies know that because they have a bottom line and they have shareholders and other people who they are beholden to, they can't do that, essentially, because if it's found out, the bad PR would kill them. And sometimes, to be honest, the fact that people could find out and it will trash the reputation of a corporation, unfortunately, is the only thing that keeps some places from doing shady things. Do I think that people should be taking consumer and patient safety into account and making that what they lead with if they are doing any kind of manufacturing for things that go into our bodies? Yeah, absolutely. But I'm also okay with the fact that if they don't actually care about people, that they have to fake like they are just so they don't get canceled, right? Or that their stock doesn't drop. Whatever way, it's still protecting the patient consumer. And so the fact that there could be people that don't have that over their heads, I don't know if that is a sufficient argument to say that something should be not created using this Plan C option. I think, the other piece within that is when you look at, the numbers that are coming through, one of the things that Novo talks about as something that should be a reason why it shouldn't be done, I think honestly is kind of laughable. So we've seen a lot of situations where there are people who are doing Plan C and they have either not correctly read the instructions that they have received from the pharmacy, or it's just like user error, even after they have read the instructions. Like maybe they don't understand it well enough. And we've all seen and heard of those situations where somebody was supposed to take X amount, but they draw off 10 times that amount because they weren't looking at the syringe correctly, or they were using an incorrect gauge of syringe compared to, what they should have been using. They were not using an insulin needle that has a certain set of tick marks on it. They were using a different version of insulin needle that has a larger set of grouping. When it comes to medications, especially if you're taking medications from a vial, you've got to know how much is in the vial that you are taking, because folks who are, and this is why, again, when I'm talking about folks that are doing Plan C, I'm always very clear. I don't think anyone should be doing anything that involves you having to be part of the process of preparing your own medication. I mean, if it comes to mixing bacteriostatic water, any of that, I say don't do it, unless it is coming to you in exactly the way it should be taken, and all you have to do is take the right measurement out. To me, yeah, that introduces user error. But again, the thing with that is there are folks who are not doing that. There are companies that are like, oh yeah, let's do the RPs, the research peptides. I say stay away from that. But there's lots of orgs that are doing Plan C, and it's literally the medication comes to you and it is ready in exactly the format it's supposed to be in. And it's user error or people that are not reading instructions carefully. The fact that people are not reading instructions carefully when there are actually instructions, again, that is something that happens with regular everyday medications all the time, right? You were supposed to take this much and they give you the medicine spoon, right? And instead of that, you took this much in the medication spoon and that was the wrong dosage. That's not a reason, in my opinion, to put something on a DDC list. So in my opinion, I think if people were looking at this objectively, the arguments that they are making, I don't think rise to the level of something being put on the DDC list, especially when you look at it in light of the types of medication that are currently on the DDC list. It is all based in manufacturing difficulty. And it is certainly not for one specific compound, lowercase c, one specific drug by name. by sorts, like semaglutide or tirzepatide. And so that's the reason why I personally think that Novo should not prevail with this request that they have asked the FDA to do. If we're looking at it from a political viewpoint, and by political, I'm saying the lowercase p political, just in everything is politics with a lowercase p, because we're people and we have our own differing ideas and motives and things that we want and things that we don't want. Novo's motive is obviously they want to shut down any type of competition for their branded drug. I think, if we're looking at what the FDA is looking at, they're trying to look at the higher level around manufacturing and product safety. But if we do, like, maybe for a second, put like a capital P and look at this with the capital P political thing, we know for a fact that at least right now, the governmental administration that's currently in office, if that administration, if that party continues to be in office after the election, we already know, number one, Bernie Sanders is not a fan, right, of the prices that these organizations are charging American consumers compared to what they're charging people in other countries. And that is why, we saw the voluntary price drop that Lilly did on tirzepatide. If you go on the website and look at Lilly's cost savings area for Zepbound right now, the 2.5 milligram dose and the 5 milligram dose, those are really low compared to what people are used to seeing. It's under $400 for the 2.5, and it is under $600. I think it's like $550. Don't quote me on that, for the 5 milligram dosage. Now, the rest of them are still the astronomically high price that everybody's used to seeing. But Lilly did that voluntarily, and that's because, President Biden and Bernie Sanders were getting ready to take a look at this because people are really upset about the cost of these medications. So if we're looking at it from a capital P standpoint, that is kind of the opposite of what would be largely, I think, what some of the government is even wanting. Keeping the ability to compound out of people's hands on these types of medications will only exacerbate the problems that led to this option even being done in the first place. Too many people who want these medications, not enough of the materials, not enough of the drug itself from the brand name manufacturer to fill that need. And then, of course, the piece that nobody's allowed to consider at the FDA, the freakishly high cost of the medications. But if we already have people who are complaining and not happy about how much these medications cost for the brand name version, when people in other countries are paying less for this, I cannot see a federal regulatory agency like the FDA giving them another opportunity to continue to juke the prices because people don't have any other option but to pay that price. So that's my opinion on things and where I kind of fall in terms of not only what I think will happen, but what I think should happen. I don't think that they will prevail. I also don't think that they should prevail in that way. And so now that I'm sitting here, I'm really hoping that you all have not been seeing me at a crazy angle, because this entire time it has said that the orientation is locked. So I'm going to be really sad if I've been sideways for an hour. Hi to the folks that were visiting. Hi, Star, and hi, Kev. Thanks for tuning in here and leaving a little comment there down in the chat. But that is what has been on my mind, and I wanted to just kind of get out there. I think that honestly, maybe I might start doing this because at least twice a week, I am always going to be in the car 2 times a day when I have to go in to my office at work. And these news type things that are, they can be a little bit boring, right? For a regular episode that folks would be tuning in for. And I really want to keep getting to some of this other material for my more prepared episodes for folks, because it just makes it a lot easier for me to, as much as I would love to try to put out 2 videos every week, I'm slowly coming around to the admitting it that I don't have the time to be able to do that with the amount of work that I do for my actual job, and then with on the side my clients that I'm serving with my travel business. And so I think this will be a good mix because I'm always in the car. This is a period of time where I can have an opportunity to really kind of report on the regular everyday stuff that I'm seeing that comes out with the news, and give people that option if they want to hear about it. Because there's a lot of folks who, they're not super interested in the news under the stuff, but they do want to hear what I talk about in terms of like the tips and tricks and strategies. And so this is going to be something I'm going to try going forward. But I'd love to hear people's feedback about that. You can leave your info, what you've thought about it in the comments, your opinion. Maybe I'll throw a poll up as well within the community to see what people think about it. But that is honestly, that is it for me today. So that's the tea on the latest news about Plan C, what's happening with FDA, and in our 2 main juggernauts in this GLP-1 manufacturing craze, Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk. If you all are thinking about anti-obesity medications, absolutely talk to your doctor or your medical professional, preferably somebody that is a specialist in obesity medicine or an endocrinologist, because those are the folks who know about these medications the best. As always, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a representative of or represented by any pharmaceutical companies. I'm just one woman who has gone through this journey, and I am sharing my own opinions, my own experiences with other people who are looking to take advantage of this GLP-1. I call it a miracle. So if you enjoy the content that I put out, please, absolutely, if you have not already, hit that trifecta. Please like, subscribe, hit that notification button, and I'll see all of you on the other side. Thanks a lot, everybody. Talk to you soon.